Hello and welcome to a week 15 edition of the rest of season top 150 updates, aka preparing for the playoffs, aka best ball crunch time. As always, joined by the two soulless spreadsheet virgins. It is Mike Leone. It is Mark Dankenbring. First of all, I want to say congrats to everyone who grinded season long and made it to the playoffs. There's so much variance in season long. I think strategy can go a long way, but man, there's an incredible amount of variance, and that's being heightened this week by all the COVID outbreaks. Just like I feel like in best ball and in season long, like if you can dodge the COVID outbreaks and the injuries, you're going to be in a really good spot in both. But anyways, Mark, good morning.
Good morning. Yeah, it's been a little bit of a long week. Yesterday was a long Tuesday projecting the teams, but I feel like we're in a good spot, and hopefully things calm down a little bit as the week goes on.
Leone, have you recovered from getting your asshole ripped open by the video team all week in graphics and videos? Good morning.
I'm trying to recover, but every day there's a new something out there, so it's made it difficult. You better believe I'm gonna have like all sub 5% players in my lineup this week, no matter what.
I wanted to. I don't want to spend too much time on best ball, but I think it's somewhat interesting as we go to best ball just to think about results. Leone, how did you do in your advancement rates in best ball? And do you think that this year was different? Because I saw a lot of people I consider to be really sharp with like mediocre advance rates, 15%, 16, 17%. And honestly, like that's not very good considering how much money you tied up for so long. So what do you think about best ball this year? Was it fluky? How'd you do?
I did well considering the things I got so many like big things wrong, like the whole Leonard Fournette, Ronald Jones disaster. I mean, everyone who's listened to our stuff knows I was really heavy on the rookie quarterbacks, and that's been rough. And you're just given those two things right off the bat, I wasn't expecting a very good output. And a lot of the zero running back candidates, didn't really hit in a huge way outside of Fournette. I guess James Conner was a pretty big win for us. I ended up advancing 13 out of 65 in Best Ball Mania 2, which is 20%. I was happy to get up there. I think some of the high-end tight end performances under this season really helped me because I was pretty invested in the premium tight ends, which was pretty touch and go there for a while. And FFPC, though, I did really well. I got 3 out of 11 teams through their tournament, which is a little higher stakes, and their playoffs started week 14, and I got all 3 teams through the first round of the playoffs. So I was pretty pumped with that, and 1 out of 2 big dog teams. So I ran pretty pure on my higher dollar best ball stuff. But as far as the season overall, I definitely think there's some lessons to be learned. And first of all, we talk about this when we bake in ADP into our rankings, but you can't have too much hubris, like in thinking you can predict the future. I mean, this stuff's really chaotic, and at a certain point and a certain price, like you have to start getting some exposure to players. And I do think sometimes we've gone through a shift in the industry where people have smartly started to focus a little more on upside and quote unquote league winners. But that may have even gone too far the last year or two where it's like, oh, we can't draft Melvin Gordon in the 11th round now. And it's like, well, this dude had like 10 usable weeks, it was super good. So that's something I'm going to try and be more aware of next year. Like so few guys are true league winners from the running back position. Jack Miller wrote an article for us. Like the only one the last 2 years that was like a huge league winner was honestly Leonard Fournette this year. And then there were some really good fill-ins here and there along the way. So I'm going to try and be a little bit more mindful of that next season.
Yeah, I have in the 555 on DraftKings, I played 2. I got 1 through, and it was a lot of micro stuff that I didn't think like my construction was great or anything. And it was actually a CMC team that somehow made it through. But like, I got on Debo, like I was really high on Justin Jefferson, and like micro takes in some of those higher stakes stuff where you're not playing as many and you can't like formulate a strategy across makes a huge difference there for sure. I also say that I like backed myself into a corner so many times at quarterback that I did these like Derek Carr stacks late, which Derek Carr, whatever, but that got me on like last round Renfro so many times. And like, I mean, it's just ridiculous. Like I was like, God, I can't believe I'm taking Renfro, but it was like the 19th round or something. I was like, fine, I'll take Renfro as part of this Carr stack. And next thing I know, like, you never know what's going to happen. Freaking Renfro was like the key to advancing in best ball, which is like, Totally.
And that's
totally.
what's, big with diversification and correlation, like those two things. Carr ends up being one of the best late round quarterbacks. Kirk Cousins was with the guy that he did. And again, that was something I missed on a little bit, like being a little more hyper focused on upside versus those pure pocket passers. But I'm with you as far as the micro stuff. FFPC, I did a little bit better than underdog because, the prices on Cooper Kupp and Deebo Samuel were great there. Out of my 3 teams there, 2 have Kupp, 2 have Deebo, 2 have Jamar Chase. And I'm just kind of riding those performances.
Mark, I don't even know if you were grinding best ball, but any best ball takes before we move on to the rest of season top 150?
I did a decent amount of the Draftkings leagues, just like 12 team leagues. I thought had a pretty decent edge there just with our rankings rather than focusing on the large field, kind of tournament style stuff. So I've, I'm in a place where I'll turn a decent profit at this point on those. I did a handful of underdog stuff, and I think I did like 3 puppy drafts and I advanced, 1 or 2 in each of them. So not a whole lot, but overall, I think it'll be a positive return for pretty low entries.
Yeah, that's peak virgin, Mark, doing just a straight 12 teamers, not even the tournaments.
Yeah.
But if you do those, the edge I think is like big because people are kind of like galaxy braining these tournaments, and then I think they do it when they draft these 12 team leagues where that Melvin Gordon example, like when your week 1 score literally counts the exact same as your week 17 score, the strategy is a little bit different.
All right.
Well, I just got so tired at drafting underdog. The ADPs were so sharp, and I felt like it was all like ETR, ETR stuff. And so when I went on DraftKings, I could get so many more of the players I want. Ended up with a ton of Jamar Chase. So, he's really led me to a lot of cashes over there.
All right. For today's show, we are going to focus a little bit on the rest of season top 150, but really we're just trying to talk about some fluid situations that maybe affect you guys in the playoffs and just get some takes on situations going forward for the last month of the season here. I want to talk about the Seattle backfield real quick. Silva famously was all over Rashad Penny last week, led him to 30K. I'm a little bit skeptical on Penny going forward because A, this was a matchup against the Texans. B, he only outcarried Alex Collins 16-7. Now you could say Rashad Penny's a former first-round pick who's playing great right now, has earned more. I don't know that Seattle sees it that way. Leone, how are you thinking about projecting Seahawks backfield going forward?
Yeah, it is difficult because, as you said, it was kind of the nut spot for him. And, shout out to Silva, who had him ahead of Collins, where we had kind of split that a little bit more. I do think Penny, obviously has more juice than Collins, a little bit of upside. I think the best part, the biggest, pro Penny argument is that week 16, they're home versus Chicago. Week 17, they're home versus Detroit. And that matchup against Detroit is shaping up to be kind of similar to the matchup they just had against Houston. So that does get me a little bit excited, but ultimately it is an offense that their plays run per game was so low that if you're splitting carries and your plays run is like in the 50s, there's just not going to be a ton of work for you. You're going to have to be hyper efficient. So, this matchup against the Rams coming up just seems like a pretty unideal spot to chase those points. But, you do probably want to hold on for this championship round matchup against Detroit.
Yeah, Mark, Leone just mentioned some playoff schedule stuff. Let's reiterate for people what we think kind of the ideal playoff schedules are, because I think that can help people when they're thinking about stashes and stuff like that. I actually just added, I was getting my playoff team set. I am like barely in the season-long streets, but I did make the playoffs in one league where I just added, I believe it was the Chargers defense who play the Texans in week 16, I believe it is. And so like you get spots like that where I think adding defense, adding running back stashes, adding stuff like that can like make a big difference if you do it ahead of time before you're competing with other people on waivers. But anything for the people on playoff scheduling and anything they can do ahead of time.
Sure. Yeah. So I made a few stashes last night as well, running waivers. And I think my top one offensively would be Ronald Jones with Gio Bernard going on IR. He's out for at least 3 weeks. And obviously we've seen the massive role for Fournette. And the Buccaneers get the Jets in week 17, which will likely be the finale for fantasy playoffs. So if Fournette somehow goes down in the next couple of weeks, you could get Ronald Jones for your season-long finale, which championship, which would be an awesome potential stash there. Defensively, I like the Dolphins a lot. They get the Jets this week, and they were on bye last week, so I think they should be available. And then the Eagles, I think, is an interesting one. They don't have the greatest defense, but they have a strong defensive line, and they get Washington, the Giants, and Washington again the next 3 weeks. And both of those teams have pretty weak offensive lines and, skeptical quarterback play. So I like those two guys a lot. And then we've hit on, San Francisco. They have the top offensive schedule heading into the playoffs. But most of their players are probably already stashed at this point. You can maybe, pick up a JaMychal Hasty or Jeff Wilson if they're still out there. But, we've kind of seen where it's going to go there. Ryan Reynolds' article was great on preparing for the playoffs on ETR. That's still up. So I would recommend people take a look at that as well. But those are kind of the top things that stuck out to me right now.
Yeah, the San Francisco stuff strikes me as so interesting because before the season, we could actually identify, and I'm real skeptical about people trying to identify good playoff schedules before the season starts. But it was so obvious, Atlanta, Tennessee, Houston in weeks 15, 16, 17 for San Francisco. Obviously, that's a great spot. It's muddled a bit now, though, Leone, because I think Eli Mitchell will be back from the concussion. They have Hasty. They have Jeff Wilson. Debo I don't even know what Debo's role is anymore. And Kittle and Ayuk are also commanding targets at such a high rate. So I feel like nobody's going to even project that well. Maybe Eli will if we think he has the full role. But what do you think about what's going on with San Francisco right now?
Yeah, I mean, relative to expectation, the guy I'm actually most worried about is probably Debo. You mentioned not knowing what his role is. He only had one target last week. He missed week 13, week 12, he had 4 targets, and they were using him as this hybrid running back wide receiver, and he's just not manufacturing the same touches in the passing game. And that's also coincided with George Kittle having some monster games and Brandon Ayuk quietly carving out a really consistent role in the pass game. So I do think because of the way this offense is operating and their schedule that a lot of guys can get there for you, right? I'm not overly concerned. And again, you're obviously starting Debo. I have him in the NFC playoffs, starting him no brainer start. It's just, relative to what he's done over the course of the season, I'm a little worried. Elijah Mitchell, I'm not worried. They just seem to absolutely love him. He should smash in this schedule. I think Ayuk is a really solid wide receiver 3 at this point. And if you've got Kittle, I mean, the floor there is still not that high, just because if they get ahead in some of these games, they could run so much. We've seen 4 target Kittle games, but he's got a ceiling that, other tight ends just don't have that. You just get one of those weeks, especially if you're in NFC, FFPC, where it's cumulative score for rounds 15 to 17 or something. I mean, we could still see even if we just get one more of those monster performances, it's going to go a long way.
While we're talking about elite tight ends, Mark, I want to bring up Travis Kelce. It's hard for me to say if this is an age model situation or not. But he's 32 years old. He's been under 30 yards in 4 of 13 games this year. The more concerning part to me, which I talked about with Silva yesterday, is it doesn't feel as concentrated as it used to. And maybe that's because against the Raiders, they could do whatever they want. In these last few games, they have had soft matchups. They've done whatever they wanted. I think against the Chargers tomorrow night, perhaps they go back to being hey, we need to score a lot of points here. We're going to feature Kelce and Tyreek. But it hasn't really been like that lately. What do you think about what's going on with Kelce here? I know there's an argument going on in my mentions right now about whether Kelce was a good first round pick or not, because he's still a top 2 or 3 tight end, and people still are trying to make the case that the positional advantage that Kelce gave you in some weeks was good enough to make him a good first round pick. I tend to disagree, but anyways, I don't know if people who have Kelce are still alive or not, but what do you think about him going forward?
Yeah, I think when we look at Kelce, initially, I think the expectations were just so high coming into the season, and rightfully so, as you mentioned, as a first round pick. Last year he scored 100 more points than the next closest tight end. And so I think just naturally we had to have lower expectations coming into the year that probably wasn't going to happen again. Looking at the statistics, the volume is down a little bit. Last year he averaged about 9.7 targets per game. This year it's closer to 8.4. So it's missing over a target per game. His ADOT is the lowest it's been in the last 5 seasons. It's about 1.5 to 2 yards shorter. But then, like, looking at kind of the age model stuff, his yards after catch per reception is actually the highest it's been in the last 5 seasons. So I think he's actually moving pretty well still. I think just his role is slightly different in the offense. That's a little above kind of my pay grade to be able to diagnose at this point. But it seems like they're using him in a lower A-dot role. He's getting slightly less volume, which isn't great. But overall, amongst tight ends, he's still tied with Mark Andrews for the most targets among all tight ends. He has the most catches, second most yards, is top 5 in touchdowns. So he's still been solid. The last couple of weeks have definitely been poor, but the Chiefs have only thrown the ball 24 and 29 times the last 2 weeks. So, if they get back up to the 35 to 40 range, which we're expecting this week, we took a, over on Patrick Mahomes' attempts prop. I think Kelce could have some bigger games in the home stretch. And, Evans mentioned this, they've been more of a defensive team the last 2 weeks. So I think just like kind of natural game script and volume should go his way more. And they're probably saving him for, more of the stretch run in the playoffs anyway, is when they're really going to need Kelce. So I think it's fine. Obviously he hasn't returned kind of the first round value, but overall I'm still optimistic. If I have him in my tight end slot going into the fantasy playoffs, I'm feeling extremely confident.
Yeah. And I will argue with Leone in the offseason about whether Kelce was a good first-round pick or not going forward as we talk about the tight end from a more macro perspective. I wanted to stick micro for a second here, Leone, because, we talked a lot last week about Alvin Kamara's projection. And I think it can be hard to project Kamara with Taysom because we have all this concern about Taysom rushing. We have all this concern about how often he's going to target running backs, but the last couple games, Taysom has targeted running backs at a really high rate. Camarda gets up to a 24% target share in this game against the Jets. Now, when you play the Jets, obviously, like, things are going to get inflated, and I'm not sure that Camarda is going to they're even going to get like 33 running back carries in games that often, but I think they want to. And so, like, we had a lot of trouble projecting Camarda last week. How do you think it went down? How do you think about projecting Camarda going forward?
Yeah, I mean, you're obviously optimistic with what happened. 27 carries, 5 targets for a player like Alvin Kamara. That's huge. It does get a little bit more difficult in terms of their schedule, at Tampa. Then they've got Miami and Carolina. I think the running back targets honestly are going to stick. They just don't have that much in the passing game. It feels like they just have to manufacture those. And, even last year, while I was concerned about the Camarda targets with Taysom, I do think it got blown out of proportion a little bit last year where, like, the first game he didn't have any targets and they had the Kendall Hinton game and, like, it wasn't quite as bad as I think we perceived. So I'm okay with it. I think the targets are gonna be there. The pure rush attempts I get a little concerned on, just if this offense isn't able to dominate a game like they were able to against the Jets and just run a whole ton of plays. I think you're probably looking at more like 15-ish carries versus 20 plus carries consistently, which is still going to be really good, really high end. We have him in the top 10. We have him RB5, but that's what's keeping him just a little bit behind some of these other guys.
This Gabe Davis situation, and we spent a bunch of time on it yesterday with Silva, but man, I mean, it's embarrassing for the Bills to get Manny Sanders out there for so many routes this year and have him produce so little. Like, give Gabe Davis a chance. And now, Mark, they finally have to give him a chance because it looks like Manny Sanders is going to miss multiple weeks. Now, the tape grinders, for whatever reason, don't like Gabe Davis. I kind of pay that no mind because Gabe Davis is earning targets. And, like, I think that's a skill. Gabe Davis' targets per route run is up around 16, 17%. That's pretty strong for a secondary player. He also has a pretty good red zone role, it seems. So I'm optimistic on Gabe Davis going forward. I assume that most people have added him by the time they're listening to this, but if they haven't, he would be a priority add for me. What do you think about Gabe, Mark?
I like him. I added him in a few leagues as well, where we play 3 wide receivers. I'd feel comfortable starting him as a wide receiver 3 or in the flex. It's not the best schedule for the Bills. They get Carolina, who's been a decent team defensively, and they play at a pretty slow pace. So just the plays could be muted there. And then they get New England again, always strong defense. But you do get Atlanta in the fantasy championship in week 17. So if you could potentially get there, I think he could be a smash then. It sounds like Manny Sanders is out with a knee sprain, week to week. So I could see him being held out, especially if they win the next couple games kind of the playoff run. They could save him there. So I don't really have a whole lot of like talent take on Gabe Davis. Every time he's played, I feel like he's produced when he's gotten the routes, and he's certainly a big play threat as well, which I think is enticing in fantasy. So yeah, I'm interested in adding Gabe Davis for sure. And I think he could be productive in the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Last thing before we get out of here, Leone insisted on defending the olds. And so Julio Jones, like, you could tell yourself a story last week that with no AJ Brown, that with like literally no pass catchers, like to speak of, that Julio Jones could see a 35% target share. I get that you could tell yourself that story. However, it appears to me, at least, Julio Jones is no longer capable of playing a full game. He only ran a route on about 65% of Tannehill dropbacks. He only played on, 55% of the snaps or something like that. And he's no longer capable of dominating a game in the way that he used to. So, Leone, I give you the floor to defend Julio Jones, who, I mean, every time the guy goes out there, I'm like, man, how is he even going to make it through this game? So go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I do think like that's the biggest concern is he going to play a full complement of downs first week back? And, we had bet the over on his prop, and, I was a little worried because I was always worried whenever we bet an over that I'm going to feel the wrath of Levitan when it doesn't hit. And, of course, not that it's surprising, but Jacksonville was just atrocious. They scored 0 points, and Julio actually had six of the first 20 targets for the team. And then the game started to get out of hand. So I'd be interested to see how the routes were broken down. If he took off, a higher share of routes in the fourth quarter versus the relative to the rest of the game. But he did have, a 22% target per route run, which was still really good. And on the season, he's 18th in the entire NFL in yards per route run. So he has been pretty effective when he's been out there. And, a decent bit of that has come playing alongside AJ Brown, who's out at least one more game. So if we get Tennessee, in a spot where they actually have to throw a little bit, I do still think like there's like a 10 catch Julio game, out there. And there's not a ton of players, ranked around him that have that sort of upside. Maybe I'm hanging on too long, as I tend to do with some of the olds, but I think it kind of ran a little bit bad last week, and I still want to see another week before I call it on him.
Yeah, I don't see a 10 catch game in Julio. Not just because of the way his talent is now, but also because like I don't know how many times Ryan Tannehill drops back enough to get Julio a 10 catch game. But yeah, I mean, is what it is. I like where we have him here, like right around this range here feels good to me, around guys that like you're not really excited about playing in your fantasy playoffs. I mean, my guy Cortland Sutton can't earn a target since Jerry Jeudy has been back, and guys like that. All right, that is going to do it for this week 15 rest of season top 150 update. Not sure what the format is going to be for this going forward. We might not do it at all. We might come up with a different format for the last couple of weeks, but either way, you guys are in the fantasy playoffs now. You know what to do. Go out there and win. Win, baby. 4. Leone. 4. Mark. 4. Producer Adam. I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.